It's 77 years after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. In all these 77 years, we have remembered him twice a year, almost in ritual fashion. But today, there are deep questions, deep thinking, whether it's possible to actually retrieve Gandhi for our times. And probably the main reason behind it is that we are confronted with a situation which Gandhi himself confronted towards the last days of his life. A time of intolerance, a time of communal disharmony, a time when people were fighting one another. And Gandhi's death was in a way a sacrifice to the ideal of a harmonious, peaceful nation of nonviolence. And today when we ask this question, whether Gandhi can save us or we can save ourselves through Gandhi, through the retrieval of his memory and his thoughts, we are joined by Professor Sudhir Chandra, one of the foremost thinkers about Gandhi, a historian but an intellectual among historians, whose works have consistently addressed the thoughts and life of Gandhi. His book, Gandhi, An Impossible Possibility, is probably a delving into the very person of Gandhi, his inner thoughts, his inner conflicts, especially during his last days, when he died a tragic figure, when he died with most of his dreams shattered. Welcome, Professor Sudhir Chandra.
Thank you.
Let me start with a little remark that you made a few years back about the Indian nation having taken its birth with an act of patricide. In that sense, India is probably very unique in the sense that at its moment of birth, it was guilty of killing its own father, the Mahatma. What does it bode as a nation for such an act to become part of our history? And how do you see it now, that particular situation where we may be able to identify a person who did it, but at the same time, there is a nation which is fully guilty of that particular crime? How would you see that now?
Well, honestly, it doesn't bode well for a people that the history of their independence should begin with an act of patricide. Idea of patricide, or this looking upon Gandhi's killing as an act of patricide, itself is something which is not usually shared by Indians, which in a sense is extraordinary, that they should not look upon Gandhi's assassination as an act of patricide and instead hold a certain individual or a certain ideology responsible for the father's death. That in itself is significant. And like I said, it doesn't bode well. Now, why it doesn't bode well? Not because an individual was killed, but because the ideals that he stood for, the path that he showed us, which we believed we were following, all that has been forsaken. And it is that which makes this act of patricide. Now, what is the word for it? tragic. And I would say that this is a tragedy not only for India, but for humankind at large. Because even while Gandhi was fighting for India's independence and harboring a certain dream of independent India, he did not have only India in mind. He was always thinking in terms of a new world structure, which is evident in his Hind Swaraj, a text which he wrote in 1909. And from then on, even when Gandhi talked of India's problems, when he talked of a dream for a new India, he always maintained that India will show a path to the entire world, and this restructuring of India will actually be a signal for the rest of the world to follow. And I'll remind you of an expression which he often used, and that was 𝗃𝗍𝗃 jagat. Now this 𝗃𝗍𝗃 jagat is his concern, not only India. So the killing of Gandhi, and I need not reiterate, when I say killing of Gandhi, it's not just the killing of an individual. So the killing of Gandhi is actually a tragedy for the entire mankind.
However, Professor, though he was killed as an individual and in his body at that point of time, what we have seen subsequently is that his ideas do survive in one fashion or another, which is evidenced much more by the fact that of late there have been attempts to kill him again and again and again. I'm of course referring to, on the one hand, the extremely objectionable attempts made by certain quarters to reenact the killing of Gandhi. But at the same time, in terms of the principles of government, there has been a turning back against Gandhi, or a turning against Gandhi, a reiteration of the objections against Gandhi, which I would feel is a pointer to that, to the idea that his ideas are still alive. Even though you've killed Gandhi, he still is alive in a certain manner of speaking.
Now, the way you formulate it, to me at least, my first response is that I'm rather intrigued by this formulation. I mean, the relationship which you seem to, well, you suggest between the need to physically reenact the killing of Gandhi and the killing of the ideas. Now, suppose we were having a private conversation, I would have asked you for an explication. Can I ask for that explication now?
Please do. This is a free conversation.
So, do clarify it for me, this connection which you are suggesting, because I would see it differently. I would see it as this, the need to reenact the killing of Gandhi, to my mind, does not imply the need to kill his ideas, precisely because his ideas have been killed, and the acceptance of the killing of those ideas is now wider spread than it ever was. They have this courage to reenact his killing. Now, this kind of brazenness, to my mind, suggests that the death of Gandhi, in the figurative sense of the term, is now more real than before. So please explain to me.
No, I was seeing it in terms of a certain need on the part of those who stand against Gandhi to reiterate this killing. I mean, had he been forgotten, this wouldn't have been necessary. Had he not been in the memory of the people, this wouldn't have been necessary. But almost as an ideological compulsion, almost as an assertion of their particular brand of politics, they reenact this. Maybe it is the fringe elements that are doing this, but still that reenactment elicits a certain kind of, shall we say, support from the people who are in power. And that is why I wondered, that kind of a hatred can only come out of a doubt, of a fear that Gandhi is still alive in the minds of people, and even the last vestige of his ideas have to be killed. May I also remind you, I've read this from your book, of Gandhi before his death saying that after my death, people will realize that the old man was right. I was thinking also of that, probably not immediately after his death, but as time has gone on, have we realized that he was probably right?
Now I get a sense, and with this I would agree, and I would add to this that this is precisely the problem. Compared to 1948, today the relevance, the significance, and the meaning of Gandhi's ideas are clearer compared to 1948. Not because we have become wiser or we have become more intelligent, but because the world has changed in a way. The world has started moving towards a path of self-destruction in a way it had not moved during Gandhi's lifetime. So the meaning of what Gandhi said in 1909 in his 𝗁𝗏 and what he kept saying till the very end, that meaning is now becoming clearer and clearer in our daily life, in our individual daily life and in our collective lives. So now I can understand.
Can you explicate this a bit further?
Simple things like the path of development we took after independence, which was not only in clear violation of Gandhi's position in the 𝗁𝗏, but it was also an act of open defiance. This is significant that while Gandhi wrote the 𝗁𝗏 in 1909, during the subsequent years of the freedom struggle, he never pressed for the acceptance of the 𝗁𝗏 ideal by the Congress. It is only, 36 years later, when it's clear that India is going to become independent, that he tries to broach the matter with the the future Prime Minister of India. And his famous letter to Jawaharlal Nehru of 5th October 1945, in which Gandhi said, now just to remind you of that, he said, now that we are going to be independent and you are my political heir, I want to tell you what the India of my dream is. And he says that what I am going to tell you now is the same which I had written in my 1908 text. Now, Gandhi has forgotten even the year of the publication of Hind Swaraj. And significantly, he also adds, and it is significant because here is a man who has forgotten the date of the Hind Swaraj. He says, the book is not with me at the moment, nor is it necessary. Because what I am going to tell you now, I say is a reiteration of what I have already said in Hind Swaraj. But that is not important. What I think I said there and what I think now is important. And then he goes on to say that a happy India, a prosperous India, a harmonious India would be possible only if the unit of new India is the village and not the city. So he wishes to make the village the basic unit. And then he goes on to say, you will completely misunderstand me if you thought that I'm talking of today's villages. I'm not talking of today's villages. I'm talking of the village of my dreams. A village which will be an organic place. And then he goes on to explicate what he means by this village of his dream. And he says, and then also further he adds that I'm not suggesting that there would be no heavy industries. Now this is a clear departure from his position in the Hind Swaraj. And the old man is insisting that he's saying the same thing. But then he's also saying that for me it's not important what I said then. So he says, some heavy industries would be necessary. For example, railways, post and telegraph. And then he adds, this is what it is not important as to what we would have and what we will not have. The important thing is the real idea, asal baat, he says. And if we are agreed upon this asal baat, everything is fine. Now it is very significant that Gandhi is accepting the need of heavy industries, except that he says that these will be decentralized. We'll have heavy industries, but not centralized. And I want to remind you of Nehru's reply, which I think is most telling. Nehru replies on the 9th of October, saying that I've just come back from a hectic tour and I'll be leaving again, so I don't have time for a detailed reply. So I am only sending you a provisional reply. And in this provisional reply, Nehru summarily dismisses Gandhi's idea of Hind Swaraj, and as if he had not even read the letter, he says, and what do you mean by making village the basic unit? Village where there is superstition, where there is backwardness. So clearly, Nehru is responding to what he had read of the 1909 text and not responding to Gandhi's letter of the 5th of October. And then he goes on to say, in any case, all these years you never brought up this matter, and we honestly believe that you had given up your Hind Swaraj ideas. And now you are bringing it up. Is it the right time? In any case, this has to be decided by the representatives. You and I cannot decide it. Gandhi still makes an effort, suggests a meeting. The meeting takes a month after that. And so finally Gandhi realizes that there is no point trying to persuade Nehru that it's a lost cause so far as his position is concerned. He realizes that Nehru represents the feelings of the country, that he is a back number. So Gandhi's idea of India, Gandhi's model of a new India and a new world was rejected. So this is, you can see this as the first act towards his murder.
I was just wondering, in the present day context, where there is a much more interentangled global economy, which has been based on more and more production, and now it is moving on to virtual production and technology-driven kind of a world, where the Indian economy is also firmly part of that. On the one hand, I would probably think that Gandhi's idea of a vision of the future based upon the village is probably environmentally most, appropriate. But how far possible is it in the present situation is a question that comes up automatically. I'm not trying to defend Nehru, but I wonder how this would be practical, even if I understand that the questions of practicality are not probably the real questions to be asked.
Oh, now I realize you had asked me as to what has happened in the intervening years, and I completely forgot that and started talking of the Hind Swaraj. No, see, you have yourself shown how developments since 48 have shown that Gandhi was right. The kind of destructive path or the kind of destruction that this mode of change or mode of production entails to the whole world, that this is not sustainable. So we are all the time talking of sustainable development and making sure that we keep moving along the path of unsustainable development. So each year of this unsustainable development is a step towards mass destruction. And we have reached a point where the dynamics of this development has acquired its own pace, its own scale. It's a production of scale. And that scale has now reached a point which is beyond human control. So you are absolutely right. So even if there was the will to turn back, would it be possible to turn back? And I'm glad you say that it's not only a question of practicability. It's a question of existence. So the simple point, simple problem, the simple question as I see it is, shall we wait for this mode of production to work itself out and cause the destruction which lies in store, shall we wait for that to happen, or shall we make some attempts? Now, what those attempts can be or are likely to be, I really don't know. But someone has to make a beginning. At the moment, what we are seeing is that we have isolated, localized, small-scale efforts. But given the scale of that production, it's unlikely that these decentralized, localized efforts, however numerable, would be viable. So there is no answer to this question so far as my expertise goes. But all I can say as a human being is that we have to look for, we can't ignore the question. Either we, I commend Trump for being, so it's better that the man says, no, we are not doing it.
Coming back to to Gandhi's postulation of the village being the center of planning itself, I'm reminded of his statement in 1947, a few months before his death, after the independent Indian government had been formed, where he said that we may spend a paisa, but whether it goes to India's huts or not is all the calculation I need. Of the crores of rupees that are extracted from the huts of India, how much can we send back to them? Of course, it is the Daridra Narayan that he is speaking of. But on another level, I think Gandhi is speaking of the issue of social democracy, that political or electoral democracy does not make any sense whatever unless there is social democracy and there is an equitable distribution of resources and wealth where no one is left behind. I would suppose that today it is most relevant than ever before. Even in the phase of the technological development and the different modes of production, where on a global scale, not just on the scale of the country, but on a global scale, we find this structures of exploitation and structures of marginalization happening almost as a universal phenomenon. How would you say that this issue of social democracy can be addressed in Gandhian terms?
Now, I'll not talk of, because I'm not quite clear as to how to answer this particular part of your question. But the real problem is that while we see this, it's for everyone to see. Most of our economists are still talking of growth, as if growth would automatically result in distribution.
As if it's an end in itself.
No. They are wiser than that. They say that growth would naturally and automatically result in distribution. Now, different kind of distribution. There would be greater employment, be more money to be spent. So this idea of growth, as if, no, they are honest people who talk of growth as an end in itself. I'm talking of those who talk of the dynamics as if it is the essential and only character of that growth. So we are caught in a situation where ideologically it is growth which is being promoted. And so far as distribution is concerned, only for survival, political survival, will doles be given. So the whole structure of a polity at the moment is so flawed that even serious economic questions are not being tackled. So I have a suspicion that this myth of growth, and if we are shown these dreams and people are buying these dreams. See, I'll illustrate it with. Now, we had this, people came out on the Wall Street. Something remarkable happened in the USA. And following the USA, it is spread to the rest of Europe. And the slogan was 1% versus 99%. But what was the idea behind that? Not that the 1%, the distinction between, or the difference of one, the enormous difference between 99 and 1 should be reduced.
So that the 99 can become the 1 also.
So, exactly. Now, when the 99 are aspiring to
become the 1.
Become 1%, where is the hope for a movement? So our aspirations continue to be along lines which are violative of a viable state of life, a viable polity, a viable world structure. The reverse is happening. Our dreams, our aspirations, our desires.
Can I take you to a different tack? Gandhi and say even Ambedkar were working at a time when we only had very limited, shall we say, exposure and experience of a parliamentary democracy. We had legislative councils for the provinces, the presidencies and the principalities, and even that was in a very limited fashion. And they had what one would call a fixed common enemy or an adversary in the form of the British Empire. But today, what we find post-independence after 75 years is that we have a much more plural system. We have a parliamentary democracy and electoral democracy. We have several parties representing several interests, several geographical areas, several communities. How would their conception of democracy as it stood then, which was almost at its nascent stage, and the present condition where there are much greater interests at work and no single adversary, if I may put it that way, how will their notions of democracy match with ours, or how can theirs be a kind of, shall I say, corrective for our democracy today? And I was thinking especially of my previous question about social democracy. Unless and until, there is universal suffrage, but unless and until there is the principle of equality, democracy doesn't really work.
See, you are absolutely right. And that is why, more than Gandhi, Ambedkar is being remembered today. So this point which Ambedkar made, and a very important point, Gandhi is not invoked when we talk of social democracy. Ambedkar is, and rightly so. I have no problem with that. So right then he had shown that political democracy would mean nothing without social democracy. There was a phase when it seemed that that is kind of, that a vibrant social democracy was evolving. Post-Mandal especially. I mean, the kind of fervent, the kind of fervor, the kind of spirit we saw. And incidentally, I must confess that when this happened, I had serious reservations. But I can see what a remarkable thing happened in Indian democracy at that time. But once this Mandal Kamandal politics started playing out, the whole process got skewed. And at the moment it seems that whatever be the force of these conflicting interests, a different kind of consensus is also emerging. The 2024 election has shown that it can't work for very long. But still, the way they have mastered, or the way they have controlled the state apparatus, this conflict of interests for certain period of time can be contained. And we can see that while parliamentary democracy is flourishing, there is virtually no parliament. So it is pointless to talk of parliamentary democracy.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
So
While parliamentary democracy is flourishing, virtually there is no parliament.
There is no parliament, there is no cabinet. So they wanted to have a presidential form of government. They were planning that, and they have done even better. It's not even a presidential form of government. It's a dictatorship. So all the points the logic that you are suggesting was playing itself out, but it has been managed. So no, it's not a question of governance now. It's all management. And look at this budget. Now forget what is happening being done to certain states. Agriculture. So, and they are unlikely to go away. And once they have shown they have shown the feasibility, the viability of a certain model, why would not the others try to copy it once they are in power?
Which brings me to another very, shall I say, perilous issue. Towards the end of his time, and especially closer to independence, Gandhi's great efforts, or he was at pains, let me say, to actually hold Indian society together, even as there were very deep fault lines inside. The last travels that he had to Navkhali and then Bihar, the fasts he had at Calcutta and in Delhi, that entire time was effectively an attempt to hold together a community which was on the verge of falling apart. And falling apart through the active involvement of the people who are involved in that. To a great extent, he may have succeeded in it. Of course, there was the violence of the partition, but his fast in Kolkata and in Delhi may have averted a much greater carnage than what had happened. But I wonder if today those fault lines have reappeared in a much, much more vicious fashion, aided and abetted or widened or exploited by the people who are in power right now. I, as someone who's very deeply worried about what lies in store for us in the next 10 to 15 years, what can we probably take from Gandhi's last days, his efforts of the last days, to get us to tide over or to address, to confront this particular situation?
See, we all know what Gandhi did so far as communal strife, communal violence was concerned. What is not so well known is Gandhi's realization that now that political independence was won, he would need to wage another struggle. And that other struggle would be against the rich, the educated, because he could see that these classes were not concerned with the poor. And it's interesting that in the 1920s, perhaps 1928, Nehru, when he comes back from Europe, tells Gandhi that now the Congress should start a new movement for the interest of the poor, the laborers, the farmers. And Gandhi says, you are right. This is very important. This has to be done. And then he says, time is not yet. When Gandhi thought the time was, Nehru had other plans. And Gandhi saw that. So he had decided that in February, sometime in February, he would hold a meeting in Wardha. And that meeting in Wardha would decide the future course of action as to how this would be done. And 𝗵𝗍 Ghosh, the Chief Minister of Bengal, West Bengal, he has written a very fine book on Gandhi. He says that he went to see Gandhi. I don't remember the date, but it was late January, days before Gandhi's assassination. So first Ghosh describes Gandhi, a very disturbed, sad man. And then he says, as I was leaving, Gandhi said to me, you have to come to Wardha next month. I'm holding this meeting. So Gandhi had made all these plans. Then Gandhi was assassinated. And look at the irony of it. A meeting indeed took place. But in the absence of Gandhi, what was to happen? So Gandhi had a clear picture in his mind that his struggle was not over. And he had to wage a new struggle. That struggle did not take place. Nehru had a certain model. Incidentally, Nehru, in his reply to Gandhi, says, I can't quite make sense of that, because Nehru himself seemed to have forgotten that. He says, when there is a mixed economy, the private and the public, one will certainly swallow the other. Now, what he did about that, and he had time to think about that, we have now seen who has swallowed whom. And private industry having swallowed the public, and they hold that business, the market, has own governance. Very different kinds of strategies would have to be worked out. Those strategies social activists may work out, social workers may work out. I can really see the need for it. I don't really know how this would be done. But if it is not done, then we'll continue to have this flourishing political democracy.
I was also thinking of the kind of communal strife that is being encouraged, even actively motivated. And in this context, Gandhi's distinction between his earlier notion of passive resistance, which at that point he did not distinguish between from ahimsa, but in his later writings, especially closer to his death, he does see a distinction. And now today, when the state has become much more powerful than ever before, its strength in terms of arms, in terms of punitive power is much more than before, and where the state has become actively collusive in creating situations of violence. What would a Gandhian, if I'm not asking if Gandhi has an answer, I'm asking if we can find in Gandhi something with which we can actually address the situation.
See, I have this whole question of the Hinduization of Indian polity has been one of my major concerns, and this dates, actually I can trace it back to the 19th century. Now, of course, I'll not go into any details, but I'll very briefly like to suggest that since its nascence, Indian nationalism has had strong elements of a Hindu awareness. What we call Indian nationalism always had this subterranean current of Hindu nationalism. And I have suggested that when Indian nationalism was emerging, an unstated equation took hold of Hindu mind. The equation between Indian and Hindu. They would not say Hindu, they would say Indian. It's like Narayan Modi's development. He only has to say development. Hindutva is implied in that. And I have illustrated this. And illustrated it not in terms of so-called communal leaders, but in terms of nationalist leaders who are looked upon as pioneers of secular nationalism. People like R.C. Dutt, people like 𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, to show the unconscious or subconscious hold of the Hindu. And very quickly I'll tell you, I could give many examples, especially from literature, when Curzon, after the partition of Bengal, he introduced two draconian bills, and Gokhale was a member of the Viceroy's Legislative Council. And these two measures were meant to provide extraordinary powers to the government. And while speaking on one of these bills, Gokhale says that in passing this bill, you would only be dealing with the symptom of a disease. And if you deal with the symptom of a disease, you can make the symptom disappear, but the disease will continue. So, the first thing you have to do is to undo the partition of Bengal, which is the cause of the disease. And then, this great secular leader goes on to say that it should not be, he says that I know that Muslims will not be happy with the undoing of the partition of Bengal. And then he goes on to say, but it should not be beyond political wisdom to devise ways of pleasing the Muslims of Bengal and the people of India. Now, clearly, I'm not suggesting that Gokhale is communal. But look at this. Muslims of Bengal and people of India. And this current, what was undercurrent, has now become the current. And it has acquired a power which is very, very difficult to withstand. Now, what a Gandhi would have done is very difficult to say, because Gandhi clearly realized, and he says it more than once, that satyagraha is easier against a foreign power. Satyagraha vis-a-vis your own people is very difficult. So, all that for the moment I can suggest is to begin at the grassroots. Work within your family, work among your friends, work at the school level, write books, whatever one can do. It is going to be a long, drawn-out, slow struggle against this dominant way of, it's not even a way of thinking, it's their
way of action, practice.
So that is the first thing we have to do. Otherwise, this will be resisted only by vested interests. When they find themselves in conflict with the Hindu sentiment, they would. Otherwise, how would you explain the fact, account for the fact that even in 2002, Dalits were taking part in that? So this has become now rampant, dangerous, and it can be resisted. I know what has happened in my family, and I know what has happened in most families. And unfortunately, even the Vindhya is no longer a barrier.
No. Probably one major question that is foremost in the minds of most people given to the idea of democracy is the future of the Indian Constitution. No doubt it was and it still is a statement of aspiration that the nation would be one in which every human being can find a place, an equal place. But in the way in which the nation has evolved, we have seen that even though a lot has been achieved, there were always been, in one way or another, hurdles for the achievement of the actual constitutional objectives. And in many instances, that constitutional morality or the ethics of the Constitution, as Shakespeare would say, has been more flouted than adhered to. And today, even though it appears as a kind of anomaly, there is talk about a Hindu constitution coming up, which is written by or formulated by some people in the Sanatana Sansthan and the Sanskrit University, which is based upon the laws of Manu, and where the minorities or the non-Hindus are basically disenfranchised. How would you look at the Constitution and the struggle to actually maintain the Constitution? Because I'm not thinking of the Constitution as some kind of absolute end in itself. It is an aspirational one, and we may probably be able to go beyond that into a much better thing. But even that seems to be unachievable right now, and there are different attempts to subvert the Constitution. What is your response to that?
Well, these attempts have been gaining force. And actually, it's only you who told me about this idea of a Hindu constitution. And you perhaps told me that a draft is already ready. For me, that is not so much of a threat as the erosion of the Constitution from within. Like Ambedkar had said right in the beginning, that it will depend upon the individuals who work it.
With good people, a bad constitution will work, but with bad people, a good constitution will not work.
And so what the question you are raising, I think, has to be seen from another point of view also, that is about the worth or the efficacy of a system, whatever system. Your system of selection in universities or the working of the Indian Constitution, whatever, or your legal system, if those working the system are not invested in that system, they will torpedo it, they will violate it.
But Sudhir, what about the people who are victims of that?
That is, well, victims are in a majority, but majority is not united. But only if numbers mattered, this world would be a very nice place. It could be a difficult place also for those in a minority. But where do numbers matter except for purposes of electing? And even that is now being
subverted.
So the Hindu constitution, I don't think they'll be foolish enough to resort to something so needless, explicit but needless. This serves no purpose, this Hindu constitution.
But these are the same people who probably would do the needless, as we saw the building of the Ramakshetra.
Let us hope they do. Because then they invite a confrontation which they will be incapable of forestalling, let alone dealing with.
But that takes us back to the very thing that Gandhi was trying to avoid, prevent.
Could he prevent that?
To some extent, he did.
See, we all know that Gandhi was not told that the Congress was going to accept partition. 3rd June or 4th June, whatever be the date, when all these people went to meet the Viceroy, Mountbatten, and had that meeting, Mountbatten asked, "What about the old man? Will he agree?" And while Nehru was trying to say something, Patel said, "Leave him to me." And they came to Gandhi and said, "Bapu, we have decided this. We agreed to it." And I said, "No, you should not have." So he said, "Bapu, खून की नदियां बह जाएंगी, rivers of blood." And Gandhi said, "कितने मरेंगे? How many would be killed?" This is the votary of non-violence, that we will not accept it under compulsion. We don't remember Gandhi's question, "Kitne marenge?" And we don't remember "Kitne mare?" So Gandhi would be ready for that kind of a sacrifice, for that kind of a confrontation. If it is to be so, so be it.
And many people attribute to Gandhi the responsibility of partition when he was quietly against it.
Many more and more people are doing that. But this is the ultimate in ignorance. I'm a historian, and I keep saying, and this is most frustrating, not only for a historian, but for any person, that in the ultimate analysis, facts don't matter. In fact, Gandhi, I remember, Gandhi at least once said, "You can't counter facts with facts." Now, there is so much to be said about this. Gandhi received wires, he received letters, he received face-to-face complaints. But you had said that the partition of India would take place over your dead body. What is happening now? Why don't you go on a fast unto death? Now this is being asked of a man who has been completely sidelined. No one listens to him. He is complaining day in and day out that I am a nobody. And that man is being asked, "Why don't you undertake a fast unto death?" And Gandhi says many things about this, on this. He says, "I, let alone one Gandhi, even if 100 persons like me die undertaking a fast unto death, nothing will be changed." He says, suppose for a moment I sit on an indefinite fast and coerce people who matter into refusing partition, what will happen? The partition that is avoided for the time being would enter people's hearts. So he gives many reasons why because he says, "I'm powerless." The man is realistic. And then he says, "And shall I sit on a fast to prove myself right?" But we don't care to see that. But the most important thing, Narayanan, is that after accepting partition, he sets about undoing partition. He says, now that partition has been accepted, let us make sure that partition brings about what it has been accepted for. It's been 78 years. It has not managed to do what it was meant to do. And like you have already said, he undertakes those fasts. He goes to Noakhali, he goes to Bihar. He does everything which is in his power. And to a certain extent, he succeeds. But look at his success. Calcutta, when he's persuaded to break his fast, all these leaders go to him. Sohrawardi is there, N.C. Chatterjee of Hindu Mahasabha is there, 𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗃 Mukherjee is there, Rajaji the governor is there. And when they are persuading him to break the fast, he says, I'm ready to break the fast. But now you have to give me a promise that there will be no violence in Calcutta. And these are honest people. How can they promise that there would be no violence? So Sohrawardi comes up with what he thinks is an irrefutable logic. He says, Bapu, but that was not a condition you laid down for breaking your fast. Now you are coming up with a new condition. This is not fair. So Gandhi laughs and he says, yes, you are right. But it is implied in the spirit of my conditions. Now, mark it. They are not able to give their word that there would be. They retire into an adjacent room, have a discussion among themselves. Unfortunately, we do not know what was discussed at that meeting, but they are desperate to save the old man's life. That's the 3rd of September. Gandhi says he would leave on the 5th of September. And again they are worried. He said, Bapu, no, don't leave so early. Let's see. Now they are not even sure. Now, how long is Gandhi going to stay? Don't go now. And think of Gandhi, given Gandhi's stature and given the supposed power of non-violence and satyagraha, Gandhi's fast in Calcutta should have done the trick everywhere. Now Gandhi, prior to this, or during the height of his power, was not obliged to be present all over India to be powerful. Now, in 47, he has to be physically present to be effective, to be present in Noakhali, in Bihar, in Calcutta, and in Delhi. Similarly, in Delhi, when he suddenly announces on the 12th of January that from the following day he would go on an indefinite fast, he is asked, why? Why? The city is quiet. Why are you going on fast? No one is able to see what Gandhi is seeing. And the kind of questions he is asked. Is it proper for you to undertake a fast of this kind when you know that Patel is under fire? People will see your fast as a criticism of Patel. He is asked, is it proper for you to undertake a fast at a time when the Kashmir issue is coming up before the United Nations General Assembly? I mean, these are their concerns. And poor Gandhi writes a letter to C.F. Andrews saying, can a man do anything more than staking his life? And look at this, the effect in Pakistan. They appreciate Gandhi's. Zafrullah doesn't utter a word about it. Instead, he extols Gandhi at the United Nations. So, Gandhi's non-violence has become virtually ineffectual. And actually, I'm ready to even withdraw that virtually. Gandhi's non-violence towards the end has become ineffectual. Luckily, Gandhi himself still aroused a certain respect. They would not let him see, So for me, these fasts, Calcutta fast, Delhi fast, are not triumphs of non-violence. These are personal triumphs of Gandhi. And personal triumphs for Gandhi didn't mean anything. Now, today, given the inefficacy or the relative inefficacy of satyagraha against vis-a-vis your own people, I would suggest that we have to think of other ways. And the unfortunate case of Father 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀, I think, should be a pointer. Where is the scope for non-violence resistance in a country where the state will throw a person in jail? The highest judiciary would turn a blind eye to that. So 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀 for me, and 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀 would not have been, this could not have happened if we as people were different from what we are.
But I would at the same time suggest that earlier assassination of Gandhi's body, and when you refer to 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀, it's effectively the same ideology and the same people who've killed his ideas again when it comes to 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀. It's like something that was budding, reaching its fruition by the time we have 𝗫𝗺𝗻𝗀 and the others.
Right. But the aftermath of that, people should have been out on the streets. They were not all ideologically. The Supreme Court should 𝗁𝗍𝗪 have taken up the case of the others. It didn't. So I'm talking of that communalization of the Hindu psyche. So we have to think of other, that's why, like I said, very small scale efforts, local efforts. And these local efforts in course of time might gather momentum and become larger. But for the moment,
You're not very hopeful.
which I wish to be. So, because as one who cares for Gandhi, who knows that Gandhi said something which alone can save humankind, it is incumbent on me not to lose hope. And the very fact that even in this state of despair, I continue to speak, even though it is only of my despair, I continue to write from time to time. That in itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Narayanan.